Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to From the Frontlines 1 year later. My name is Sarah McDonald, and I'm Executive Director of Life Science Cares here in Boston. And for a while, I was getting very comfortable hosting these conversations, for better or for worse, about a year ago when we started convening our partners to talk about what this crazy public health situation was unfolding to be. So we welcome you back a year later to have a conversation with a variety of our partners on what the last year has meant for them and their organizations, as well as what the next year will look like for them and the people that they serve. Just want to take a minute also to really thank the companies and individuals who stepped up when Life Science Cares launched a COVID response fund and subsequent efforts to rally volunteers in a response to the pandemic. We were incredibly bowled over by the support we received from the industry, and we're really proud to have raised $1.9 million specifically for COVID relief efforts, and have now gotten about 1.6 million of those dollars into the community, back to organizations like the ones that you see here. The remaining funds, the plan is to spend down over the next couple of months, focused on vaccine education, outreach, and access. And so we're trying to time the response fund to wind down around the same time as the public health crisis. At the very same time, as I think a number of the folks sitting in front of you here today will share, we don't expect an end to the economic crisis that has been triggered by the pandemic, nor are we going back to a normal from before that, or nor do we want to go back to normal, recognizing that there were a lot of underlying issues with access to food and shelter and education and opportunity. And so we are really excited to recommit to the Life Science Cares model of fighting poverty by harnessing the industry's resources in service of our fabulous nonprofit partners. Folks may have seen email and some social media messages from us last week as we marked the 1 year anniversary of the fund, and have shifted to recreate and raise those dollars to go at the core mission of fighting poverty and the work that will continue to be done in the community. With that, I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers today, and by briefly, I mean literally just read their names and their titles, because we have a lot to discuss, and I want to make sure we can get to the meat of the conversation. So here with us today, we have Barry Bach, CEO of Boston Healthcare for the Homeless Program. We have Judy King, Executive Director of the Wiley Network, Nessie Ruiz, Director of Learning at Tech Goes Home, Josh O'Brien, Director of Emergency Shelters at the Pine Street Inn, and Sasha Purpura, Executive Director of Food for Free. And I'll let them all tell you a little bit about what they've been up to. So I guess maybe I'll start with you, Sasha. We sat down early on in the pandemic to talk to you about what happens when you're a food security organization and you and everyone is trapped at home, and we didn't even really know how things were going to play out since then. How has the last year been for your work and your clients?
So just to put it in some context, so Food for Free, the core is a food rescue organization. We pick up food from supermarkets, wholesalers that would otherwise go to waste, distribute it to Pine Street Inn, food pantries, shelters, schools. We have a lot of school-based programming as well. We have backpack programs for kids on weekends and free school markets, among other things. When the pandemic first hit, so one of Food for Free's ways of working has always been, how can we meet people where they are? So folks dealing with poverty have so many challenges, and if you are trying to solve a problem for them, it can be so easy to do it in a way that makes it more difficult, because they need to take time out of their day, they need transportation to go to get whatever this service is. And so Food for Free has really tried to focus on how do we get food to where people already are. So food pantries exist, they use them, we bring food there. Schools are a fantastic place where families and students are, whether the students are the parents or the students are the kids. So we have several school-based programs, camps, all sorts of agencies that we distribute to. And when the pandemic hit, everybody was at home. And that is challenging. I mean, it's easy at a school, you can reach hundreds of families at once, but as soon as this really struck, everything closed down, right? The schools closed, businesses closed, food pantries closed, some shelters closed, all sorts of places were closing, and we had to figure out, how do we now get food to people and how do we help them find us? So our first response, we're based in Cambridge, we serve Greater Boston, but we have deeper programs within Cambridge. So we went to work where we felt we could have the most effect and started doing home deliveries using 50 to 80 volunteers a day. We would pack up bags of groceries and volunteers would bring them to, at peak, 2,000 households each week and leave them at people's doors. And we were supporting other cities by bringing them food so they could operate similar programs. And I think for many of the people I've spoken with that are working in anti-hunger work, that was one of the, in some ways, most challenging times because everything had shifted. Now, over the past year, food pantries have opened up. In some cases, schools have. Some people are more accessible, but the need, I can't even articulate. I mean, I can. It's grown about 59% in Massachusetts. It is really hard to comprehend how many more people need access to food today. And then even before we went into the pandemic, it was a challenge for a lot of places to get enough food to the folks who need it. And you can't even measure it at this point. I mean, in 2019, we distributed a little over 2 million pounds of food. In 2020, we distributed 4.7 million pounds of food. And if we'd had the resources, we could have done twice that and people would have received that.
Thank you. Yeah, we just read today about another hotel laying off workers. And so, a reminder that we're not out of this for sure, that this pain is going to go on for many people for a long time.
Sarah, I want to just say to your first point, it's great that vaccines are coming and that things are changing for many of us. Hunger is not one of those. And we see several more years of this.
Josh, maybe I'll turn to you next, because also early in the pandemic, we reached out to our friends at the Pine Street Inn and said, how can we help? In a shelter environment, a infectious disease is a significant challenge. So tell us a little bit about your response and then how things have evolved over the last year.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So resetting back to those early days, when we first started our testing, we were at our most crowded part of the year. A year before that, we had over 500 guests just in our one men's shelter alone during one winter night. So we're very crowded during the winter. Our first testing resulted in 36% of our guests testing positive, and many of our staff started to be tested and many staff were testing positive. So this was a really scary time with so many unknowns. And of course, in emergency services, like the rest of us, we all go into operations mode and how can we fix it and how can we solve problems. So immediately started with the deep cleaning and the hand wash stations and the PPE and getting all those logistics, but really quickly realized that the result that we really needed was a depopulation of the shelters, and we needed to do it really quickly. So working with our partners, with the city, with Healthcare for the Homeless, with Barry's team, and Suffolk University opened a 200 bed shelter within the Suffolk University Miller dorm, which is a beautiful dorm right next to the State House, and depopulated the shelters. Had the trolleys that you see around town during the typical summer were used to trolley folks over in the open air style over to Suffolk University. And it really helped us in the main shelters, and it also really helped us allow for a real focused housing effort of those who moved over to the Suffolk University dorms. But of course, Suffolk needed those dorms back. So midsummer, through your support, which really helped to make it a reality, we were able to open the 891 Mass Ave shelter, which was a converted hotel, and really allowed for us to not have that group of almost 200 folks go back into the shelter system, which just would have been tragic because some wouldn't have had a shelter bed and we would have had more folks on the street. So through your efforts, we're able to open 171 beds at the new shelter, two folks to a very large suite style hotel room each. So really made social distancing possible and again, made the housing services possible. Happy to report right now through the efforts of the housing team and community partners, Healthcare for the Homeless is on site every day as well. We're down to about 50 guests remaining in that 891 site, which is pretty remarkable. We had a day last week where there was over 10 guests placed into housing within a 24-hour period. And that's the kind of life-changing effort that's really needed to keep the shelters depopulated and to never go back to the crowded shelters we had before. Over the summer, because of the ability to open the 891 Mass Ave site in Suffolk, our positive testing rate was down to 0%. Even during the surges, we've never jumped over 2%, and we're back in the last 60 days at 0% over the last 2 months. And the main thing we've tried to deal with over time is the fear that the guests had and the staff had to continue to do their job and do the work that they're being asked to do, and to live their lives. And there's one guest who, when we were first testing positive, who was in his mid-80s and was getting on the van to go to this place, the isolation that he wasn't sure where it was, and he was just trusting us to get on. And he saw the worry in the staff's face. One person on the team was literally in tears, and he knew exactly what that meant because we weren't sure he was coming back. And he just turned and said, I'm stronger than I look. And that's indicative of the power of the individuals and the staff and the guests that kind of got us through this last period, and the balancing of social distancing, not turning anybody away, and still keeping our focus on housing when many of our housing staff couldn't be on site either and did their amazing work off-site and remotely. And since then have opened, again, with your support, 20 new units at New Chardon Street for the most chronically homeless and challenged women who have struggled in the shelters for many, many, many years. So that has been just a miracle to have New Chardon Street open. And soon partnering on the historic YWCA building at 140 Clarendon Street. So that is a huge project, over 100 units of housing. We've got 28 more units just opened in Dorchester, which actually working towards units of housing and housing projects that have elevators so that guests are able to move into housing, have their own home and community, but also age in place. And for many of the Boston sites, older buildings without elevators, it's hard to age in place when you're on the 5th floor. So trying to prevent that from having to, a 70, 80-year-old guest or tenant from having to move, and then over 50 more units scattered throughout the city. So there's incredible work going on with housing. And I think that's the mantra for us is housing is healthcare, and housing is the solution for homelessness. So that's really been our renewed focus as we head into the spring.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Barry, since you did reference the Boston Healthcare group on site. And Barry, I still get chills thinking about when your team sent us some photos about that testing and triage tent you all erected in your parking lot. That was one of the moments for me last spring where I realized, like, this is big, like something big is happening. It's bigger than me having to stay, home from work. So tell us how things have been for you all.
That was big for us too. There were several expletives attached to it at the time. So it was definitely big. And so first of all, Sarah and Amber and all of Life Science Cares and your partners, we're so grateful to you. And in part, the finances were super helpful, but also just knowing that there's a partnership is incredibly helpful. So just to start by thank you. And just quickly, we're a large healthcare organization that straddles two worlds, right? So we work within the shelters, so we work really closely with the Pine Street Inn and the city shelters and family shelters and domestic violence shelters. But we're healthcare providers, so we're guests in each of those sites, and we have a fairly large staff. And what we recognized early on when we were doing the testing with Josh and his team is seeing so many people who were positive. We realized, and thinking about what had gone on in New York and looking at the Javits Center and how overwhelmed the hospitals were, we realized that if we couldn't sort of both bail out the shelters and the hospitals and come up with something in between, there was going to be an enormous burden, because the burden shouldn't fall on individual shelters or family shelters. And so we did exactly as you said. We converted part of our McGinnis House, our 104-bed inpatient facility. We converted half of that into a COVID unit. And then we opened 36 isolation and quarantine beds, because remember, at the time, testing could take up to a week before we got results. So if someone was symptomatic, we needed to get them out. So we literally opened MASH tents in a parking lot. Eventually they became isolation beds because we because testing improved. And altogether, and then we also opened half of Boston Hope, or the convention center. So altogether, we had 660 isolation beds, along with doing testing and contact tracing. And it's really exciting because, to Josh's point, then, from 36 to 40% positives in those early days to now overall in the homeless community, it's less than 2% of people are positive. So it's lower than even the Boston average. And then about 10 weeks ago, we started the vaccination campaign. Really grateful to the state because they prioritize people living and working in congregate settings like shelters. And so it just feels incredibly hopeful these days, but it absolutely has turned our world upside down. So I'll stop there though.
It is nice to hear the hope, and I think it's we've learned I think over this last year that balance is so important, right? Like we need to focus on where we can do better and also see what those opportunities are.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna turn over to Judy, because we had a conversation about your students and what was going to happen when school wasn't welcoming them back in person, and what schools actually mean for students who don't have home resources and network. Tell us how things have gone since last spring.
Well, I have to say, I think we worked really hard not to add to the burdens faced by Sasha and Josh, because when the school said, go home, Wiley scholars who are navigating college on their own said, what do you mean? Where am I going to go? And they had arrived at college thinking that for the first time in their lives, they were going to have 4 years of safe and stable housing. One student said to me, when I got accepted to college, I was 17. I didn't know what wasn't included in the information. And that's something that wasn't included. Obviously, no one anticipated a pandemic. And one of the things that was wonderful about everybody's response was that we did really hear from people about how they could help us out. And we were able to turn everything into virtual programming. But, we were pretty young. We're a pretty young organization. And we were finally feeling like we were on stable footing, and we figuring out, this is how we help the students, the Wiley scholars. And we would say, we are here for you. And then all of a sudden there's a pandemic. And what does that even mean? We are here for you. Sasha was saying that, everybody used to be at school and they could get to everybody in one place. We had the same thing, everybody just scattered. These are young people. They didn't necessarily make the decision that we hoped they would make in that situation. And so we spent time advocating for students at their universities. We had to raise enough money to pay for rent and food, which is something that we had never done before. We had to connect students with mental health supports. As everybody knows, mental health resources are so scarce right now and have been for a while. We had to address issues around racial tensions and inclusion at a time when coming together would have been the answer, and we could only do that virtually. We had to figure out how to bring students in so they felt connected on Thanksgiving and Christmas. As you all know, that's a really lonely time, and it's something that we had really been able to work with before. And then there were students that were getting jobs, that needed jobs, and these are people without social capital. Who are they going to call that's going to give them a job? So we, had this team that really worked hard to figure all of that out and make it virtual. We had anticipated losing a number of students, particularly students who had younger siblings that they had left in unsafe situations. It's hard to leave them the first time. It's really hard to leave them a second time if you went back to try and take care of them. We did lose a few students, but I think far less than we anticipated. because the students we work with are incredibly competent and strong. And when we said we are here for you, they told us what they needed. And so we tried to just be there for them so that they could, in fact, return to school when school opened again.
Awesome. Thank you. And Nessie, representing Tech Goes Home, I still remember I was all fired up when I first sat down with Dan last March or April about access to technology needing to be considered a human right. I mean, I've spent, I don't even know how many hours at this point, literally doing everything this way. So tell us how you and the team at Tech Goes Home have really scaled your programs in this time, as opposed to even pulling anything back.
Yeah, I think maybe more than scaling, it's more of a transformation. We've really had to change everything about the way that we conducted business, which I'm sure most organizations have. So, I mean, the last 12 months have really been really intense, and just needing so much creativity and so much problem solving. I think immediately what we saw happen was that because we do all of our work with partner organizations, I think we started 2020 with about 200 partner organizations. We're at about 250, but we had so much demand, so many people reaching out that we had to start a wait list. And so for the first time in 2020, so we actually also have a wait list of about 70 organizations that are in line waiting for us to have more funding so that we can bring them on and help them work with their people. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that there were a lot of organizations whose focus wasn't related to providing internet or computers for their members, their clients, their participants. It wasn't needed. They're used to doing things in person, and all of a sudden everything was shut down, and a lot of essential workers and social workers and just all these organizations, they couldn't reach the people that they're usually working with. So all of a sudden you realize I can't do my job because I can't connect virtually with the people that I'm trying to serve. And so I think a lot of people came to us trying to help us figure out what to do, either wanting a partnership or just asking for advice, and us like really doing a lot of meetings on just like, these are best practices. These are like the things we use to, this is how we distribute devices. This is how we get people hooked up. And these are our resources. Please share them all. So there was a whole lot of that. So it became really just kind of difficult. There was a worldwide Chromebook shortage, which is the main device we give out. So we actually weren't able to serve the number of people we wanted to because we didn't have Chromebooks, sometimes for a month at a time. And so we had to sort of just wait until we had devices on hand. Same thing with the hotspots. It became super hard to get those as well. So there were a lot of problems there. We basically started 2020 out with 6 staff people. We're just 6, and we had to hire 4 more just to deal with all the extra work. So we're now 10, and we've got 1 more hire that we're looking to make very soon. Then also the other big thing was we had to change all our programming. So us, just like a lot of other orgs, did everything in person. And I still believe, I have a long history of teaching behind me. And I feel like in person is really the easiest way to learn because there's, a lot of interactivity and the teacher can walk over and like just show you how to do something. And especially because a lot of the people we're working with are first-time computer users or beginners. So it's trying to do all of that virtually. So like, how do you get somebody on a Zoom call who's never used a computer before? Like, that's crazy. So we had to our instructors had to put in so many more hours, just even helping people individually, like how to, get on, how do you turn on your computer? How do you set it up? How do you download Zoom? How do you get onto a Zoom call before they could even start a class? So we had to get really creative on our end too with resources and like videos that people could watch on their smartphone if they had a smartphone. I've got a bunch of videos of me like, here's your Chromebook, here's the on button, because we have some learners that are at that level. So it got really kind of tricky just testing out Zoom, testing out Google Meet, testing out a whole bunch of different devices and issues that we're having. I really feel like it took us the majority of the year until we felt like we really had it, like we had really worked through all the troubles and actually had a solid program. I don't think it was till December when I felt like we had it together, and it took us 3 months. I think so we closed down, or, we came home in March, and then basically it was 3 months of how do we get everything online? And it took us until June to really launch our programs virtually. So that was intense. Of course, there was a lot of increased cost with, we're shipping devices to people's home, trying to make everything no contact, got a little bit crazy. Another really big shift that we had to make was our curriculum is really, it's individual from site to site, because our partners, really range from libraries, schools, homeless shelters, or lots of organizations that do all kinds of work with different kinds of people. But there was always a big push on like Google products, like, how to use Google Docs and Google Sheets and things like that. And we had to really shift to what was relevant at the time, which was life essentials, right? So we started making tutorials on like, how do you get groceries delivered to your house, right? So, how do we let our seniors stay home safe and get groceries, get their medications mailed to them, all these things that people are used to doing in person. Another shift towards kind of in that same realm, like helping people apply for unemployment, for cash assistance, government assistance, assistance of different kinds, and getting medical care virtually, right? So, which is really difficult because every pocket of the city, every system is a little bit different. So we can't just make like one tutorial that gets everybody connected. So we've been doing a lot of just work around helping people just have what they need for life, and that's been a really big shift as well.
Wow. Yeah, I remember doing a call for volunteers in the early days for folks who could walk people through how to create a Gmail account or a Google Doc. So yeah, we certainly all have new skills to put on the resume. So we've looked back, and Josh, maybe I'll start with you on this one. What does recovery look like for you? What is the path out of the pandemic? Where do we go from here? How are you thinking about the next phase?
So I don't know if we've developed a strict timeline because everything moves so fast, but I do think, it's got to be a multi-year effort. It'll certainly be a multi-year recovery for all of our systems. Right now we're really focused on getting as many staff and guests vaccinated as possible. I think we have about 52% of our guests fully vaccinated now, about 58% of our frontline staff, and that's really our focus in the short term. And also maintaining our ability to keep the shelters depopulated. We've really seen the success of 891 Mass Ave, which again, we appreciate your support in helping make that a reality. That really showed that when you have a space for individuals experiencing homelessness that's somewhat private, respectful, available 24 hours a day, where they know it has some permanency in the sense that they can come back, be in the same bed day after day. It creates that environment to try and tackle some of those underlying issues that they may have been struggling with over the years, and allows our teams, which are so skilled, the access to be able to reach out to those individuals in a way that's more consistent than in a typical crowded shelter setting like we used to have. So I think setting the framework of never going back to that, and programs like New Charter and others really help us place us on that footing. But right now our focus is still on the vaccinations and creating those housing opportunities, those large scale, like the YWCA project, those large scale opportunities, so we never have to go back to crowded shelters again.
I love that. I think there's going to be a sort of Life Science Cares mantra where we reiterate what you guys have said, which is the solution to homelessness is housing.
Yes.
Not shelter, it's housing, and continuing to invest in giving people the tools they need to keep housing. That's awesome. I keep forgetting to mention to the folks watching, if you have questions for any of the panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. I have a few questions here, but happy to address whatever folks want to hear about. Sasha, maybe I'll turn to you next. What is the next 6, 12, 18 months? How do we end hunger coming out of this?
So, I really wish we were at a point where we could plan. We're so tired of not planning more than a couple months. So our operations have over doubled in the last year. And a lot of what we need to do over the next 6 to 12 months is catch up to our growth. We had been growing prior to the pandemic every year, but I'd say we grew 3 to 4 years in 12 months, and we've got to catch up to that. So I'm trying right now to not try to solve everything. So, and just let the teams settle in, do the hiring that we need to do. But one of the things that's been hard for us to predict, so food supply has been a challenge. Mostly, in the beginning there were supply chain issues. Now it's demand out something supply, outpacing supply. Last year, the USDA had this program called Farmers to Families. They still have it, but it's much harder to come by, where they were working with local partners who would purchase produce and other foods and box them up in 25-pound boxes. And we were able to get access to those to distribute to food pantries and schools and others that needed it, housing facilities. And we were doing about 2,500 a week last year. That program changed significantly, and we were no longer able to access, lots of organizations did not have access to this food anymore. And thanks to Life Science Cares, we were able to launch our own new program called Just Eats, where we are boxing up those fruits, vegetables, rice, beans. We're able to bring those to a housing facility once a week so they can get it to their residents. We're bringing it to the schools that remain open, and we're bringing it to Chelsea food pantries and all over Greater Boston. Our hope had been, because these are fantastic in a pandemic, they're grab and go. You don't need to line up and pick through food that's laid out. So we were hoping come fall, the schools will reopen. We can stop doing these boxes. We can start going back to markets where we pick up a variety of food at the Greater Boston Food Bank. We lay it out at a school, families come through and collect what they want. Well, talking to the Greater Boston Food Bank, we were doing 8 markets at 8 schools last year. Pre-pandemic, we would do a market each month, and the food bank would give us food for this. They're not going to be able to go back to that in September. The demand has increased across the state, and they've risen to meet a lot of that, but we simply, it's not going to change. So now this Just Eats program that we created for a temporary response to COVID, it looks like we're going to need to continue that into the next year and beyond as another method, because there simply isn't enough food in the state through the emergency food system to meet all of the demand. So we're going to try to catch up with the growth we've seen and just take it sort of a season or a quarter at a time to understand how are things shifting. Just one more example. Prior to the pandemic, our backpack programs across Cambridge and Somerville served about 900 kids every weekend, sending them home with food over the weekends. That is now over 1,800 kids across those 2 cities and growing each month. We had been doing gift cards for the majority of schools that are closed because we couldn't distribute the food. And we've already determined next fall, we're going to have to stick with gift cards, because making 1,800 sandwiches on a Thursday or Friday like we used to do isn't viable. We have new space demands. So we're going to be looking for, we got a great temporary space in East Cambridge during all of this. That's not even big enough, but it's also temporary. So our next thing is, finding a warehouse size building and then figuring out how we're going to fund all of it, which, we've been lucky to have organizations like Life Science Cares and so many others that have really stepped up during this time. And we're really hopeful that that's going to continue beyond where we go back to normal, but the folks struggling with hunger and homelessness and other things are still stuck in that spot.
Judy or Nessie, maybe talk a little bit about sort of from the educational side, what does the future look like? And I guess also, because I know we've had some of these conversations, like what changes remain permanent for you or your organizations? There, we have learned a lot, I think, through this. Judy, do you want to start?
Sure. I think what happened when the schools closed down the dorms last year is that it wasn't just the Wiley scholars who said, what am I supposed to do now? And so all these students came to light, and we are now getting so many more referrals every week than we can handle. And we don't want to be sending those students to Sasha and to Pine Street, and we, they need all of the things that you guys provide. And so we don't want to be turning students away. And I think that's going to be sort of our biggest challenge, is can we grow carefully and responsibly, but really start to meet the needs of as many students as we can in the Greater Boston area. And I think that's going to take a year or two to figure out. I think the issues around mental health are going to be enormous. When a student takes a leave of absence for mental health reasons, they don't have much to do with their college. So they're expected to go somewhere, and they're expected to be involved in treatment and sometimes be taking a class to show that they can return to school. Well, if you have to work 60 or 80 hours a week to pay for food and rent, you can't do that treatment. And especially since that treatment costs like $10,000 a semester. So we're doing some research right now, and we're working with treatment programs to see if we can get scholarships around that. And then I think, none of these things have to do with the students, it's all their situations. And because our students are coming to college without the social capital to find jobs, some miraculously all 12 students who were supposed to graduate last May did, right? But we need to figure out a way to help them make the connections so that they can get the jobs that are commensurate with their talents and how hard that they have worked. And I'll talk about how you guys can help us with that in a minute. But the other thing is we have to realign everything. Everybody has to get used to going back to an office and to being in close contact with people. And we have to help our students understand we didn't used to pay for room and board, right? That was up to the colleges. But in the crisis, the last year, we've been supplying that so that they didn't have to go to shelters. And we have to figure out how to help them to sort of take the reins back, how to get jobs so that they can support themselves, how to utilize their colleges, and to move things, maybe not back exactly the way they were before, but something that looks a little bit more like our program as we had designed it.
Thanks, Judy. Nessie, what are you guys planning?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think as Sasha was saying, like really trying to catch up to what's happening, because there's just so much more work to do now. And I think the only silver lining I can think of the pandemic is that while Tech Goes Home has been, for years sort of telling people it's really important for everyone to have connectivity, like now it's really an issue that's at the forefront. And I think that's great because people are thinking about it and just really realizing how necessary it is. So I definitely think we've got a lot of plans. We actually have an expansion plan because we got a lot of communications and a request for help and partnerships, not just from Massachusetts, but actually all over the country. So as far away as Hawaii, I mean, it's crazy. So while we can't like expand to the entire country, we are sort of we have a long-term plan for expansion. We definitely want to expand within Massachusetts and just, reach as many people as possible. We made a lot of, on the educational side, for us, since we made a lot of changes and we had this whole like distance learning program that's virtual now, we've been doing a lot of thinking about what it's going to look like, right? When we go back to normal, whatever that is. I still think that in person is really the best, way to teach a first time or beginner computer teachers, a computer learners. So I think that we'll go back to having the majority of our courses in person. But I think we're definitely going to keep that virtual platform around. And we really thought it's going to be a really great thing now that we've got this worked out, for learners who want to take a Tech Goes Home course and can't go somewhere. So people who are hospital bound, people that are homebound, and other, just special situations where it's not possible to go to, a class in person. So I think we'll keep that around. We're also thinking a lot about, how do we keep our learners or our graduates engaged with us, right? So besides just offering a little something here and there, like we're calling it right now, like very loosely, just in-house, like Tech Goes Home 2.0. So I'm actually looking and focusing on this year how to create a next level program that people can keep attending courses with Tech Goes Home and keep learning new skills and maybe even trajectories into job placements, with maybe some partnerships with LinkedIn and Microsoft and Dell and other big places that have a lot of resources. And I think that like like 2.0, that next level, will all be virtual because all of our graduates will have a computer, will have internet service, and will know how to use that computer to keep learning. So we're definitely doing that. And we did one big thing that we did this year as our part of our COVID response was we always introduce our graduates to internet, like low cost, efficient internet options, but we weren't providing it, and we're actually providing it now. So when you finish a Tech Goes Home course, you get a Chromebook that's yours to keep, you've earned it, and you also get 1 year of paid internet access that Tech Goes Home pays for you. So we know that at least our families are set up for a year. And that's hopefully time for them to, you know, look for jobs and learn some more skills and help their family with school and et cetera, just to get, you know, past what's still going to be several months of a hard time, I think.
Thank you. Barry, I'm going to give you the first bite at the apple for my last question, which is, what do you need from us in this coming year? And that's the royal us. That's the Life Science Cares universe of companies and volunteers and employees. How can we help?
So some of it, right, gets back to, I think, the question that you had just asked. It depends a little bit on the environment, and it really is, you know, what we're, just as everyone said, we're going to be reacting to the change and trying to be a step ahead. Though with COVID, it's been so nonlinear, it's been really tough. One of the things that was a godsend for us when we opened the 4 isolation sites, we had no funding figured out. We jumped into all of those sites without actually having secured all of the funding, because you know, we were so terrified what it would mean to the rest of the community if we weren't doing that. And it was really, you know, the kind of funding that came from Life Science Cares and came from other partners that allows us to be flexible. And I'm hearing your other panelists sort of talk about that, just how important that is, these kinds of partnerships. The other thing that I was hearing from the panelists, and we experience this as well, is we feel just a profound loss of community. And, you know, so for us, opioid overdose is still a leading cause of death for the folks that we serve. We had done a huge amount of programming over the past 5 years to try to mitigate that. Most of those things were about building community. A lot of that brought in volunteers. And so I look forward to the time when we can bring volunteers back on board, and also just sort of care kits, and where we can bring people back together. So I think, you know, it's a combination. It's always, we could always use the support financially, but also the idea that we could come together as a broader community is, I think, something that's really profound for us, and sounds like it for the rest of your panelists as well. Thank you.
That's great. We miss you and your team too. Josh, what about you? How can we help in this next year?
I think, you know, as we continue to re-envision shelter, I think the theme for us would be continue to, and such a great partner, continue to partner with us to take risks and look at things differently and re-envision how we're doing things, taking risks not only in how we look at programs, but on behalf of our guests that, you know, take the New Chardon, for example. Some might have said, oh, it's too risky to open up a 20 units of housing in the same space for guests who are struggling with so many things, but took that risk with us, and that's led to some amazing changes just in the last few months. So I think continuing to work with us to take those risks as we re-envision how we do things, so we can not only place more guests into housing, but also create the environment that's really appropriate for folks that are experiencing and struggling with individual homelessness.
Thank you. Nessie, what about you? How can Tech Goes Home use our network?
Yeah, well, I think it's been amazing this year to have the support of a bunch of volunteers. As I said, we had a big shift in curriculum and had to make a whole bunch of new lessons and tutorials. So I would love to keep getting, you know, people volunteering to help with those. We're having people do written instructions for different websites, apps, resources that are so important and helpful right now. We're also having volunteers make videos that people can watch, because because some people learn a little bit better that way as well. We are also, one of our COVID responses is a series of webinars. And so if there's something that you're an expert at, we would love to have really knowledgeable people come and host webinars. So we've had, just for example, we've had some Google employees come and do some 1-hour webinars on how to use different Google apps. I had somebody from the Office of Workforce Development come and do a whole thing on credit building. You know, we've had a bunch of different stuff. So, you know, if you've got a special talent or not a talent so much, but you know, something you're really knowledgeable about that might be helpful for the everyday person, I think it's really valuable to get some of these webinars out there and people can attend live, and if they can't make it, they can watch the recording. So that's really helpful, having people volunteer for that. Also, any other special skills like video editing or any, you know, support with curriculum or resources. If you're on our website and you're like, hey, they don't have any resources for this really important issue, right? Then those are things that I would love to get some feedback about, because I'm, you know, and as I mentioned, we're a really small staff. So any help, anybody's time is so helpful to us because we're so small that it's hard for me to do everything that I have on my like wish list, to-do list, right? That I want to get done. So I think that volunteer time is so precious to us. I'd also would love everyone to really just share our website, because we have so many people working on these tutorials and stuff, and everything on our website. If you go to techgoeshome.org and on our learners tab, that's all stuff that's open to the public. So sharing those resources with friends, family, other organizations could be really helpful for people, especially if they're, you know, learning to navigate the internet and find those resources. Our webinars are open to the public as well. So really sharing what we do have, because we want to be able to help as many people as possible, not just people that are enrolled in a Tech Goes Home course. And we have resources also on like affordable internet and affordable computers as well, so that people can get those. And of course, you know, never hurts to just mention funding. You know, the more funding we have, the more we can do, the more people we can reach, and the more people we can get connected to the things that they need to keep their family and their family safe and healthy. So
absolutely. And I'll add one additional challenge to the industry. We did relaunch our laptop challenge to collect 1,000 laptops coming out of commission from industry use to repurpose for Tech Goes Home clients and community members. So if anybody has technology that still has useful life, reach out to Amber, because we're about 1/3 of the way to 1,000, I believe. But we want by the end of this year to have collected 1,000 laptops. Judy, how can we help you?
Sorry, my dogs were barking. I'm ready to go back to the office. So I have a really specific ask, which is we are looking for a sponsor and a site for our career fair in October, and an office cafeteria would be a great spot. We are also looking for a similar space for our Thanksgiving celebration, which happens on a Sunday, and our Fall Community Day, which happens on a Saturday. But really the career fair is our #1 top priority. And we're looking for companies that want to come in and meet the incredibly talented, wonderful students that we get to work with all the time. And you don't have to be offering a job. You can be offering awareness about all sorts of careers. You can be, it could be just informational. It can be for an internship. It could be for a job, for any of those things. And of course, as we move through this, we really need to fund our expansion. So those are the 2 top priorities for us right now, unless you have a whole building filled with therapists who are looking for some jobs. Those are our big asks. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Judy. And I'll let Sasha take us home here. How can we help you, Sasha?
Sure. Yeah, 7,500 to 10,000 square feet of space is our biggest need. So if you happen to have a building lying around, but the other things, funding, obviously, one of the things I think is really important is just talk about this being, whether it's hunger or people who are unhoused or students, mental health issues. A lot of people are going to go back to normal and aren't going to realize there's been a lot of attention on these things during the pandemic, which has been a positive thing. Awareness is unbelievable. Food for Free, the workplace giving increase we've seen over the last year is incredible. The number of people who give through their paychecks at their jobs, that's enormous over time as that grows. And that's because they heard about the fact that people are struggling and people are hungry. So really just talking about this stuff, and people don't realize it. Good people have no idea how many people are hungry, how many people don't have homes. The things I'm hearing about the students, things I hadn't thought about. I really do think talking about stuff like this has, it's the butterfly flapping its wing that has tremendous impacts down the road. We continue, and to what Barry said around community, one thing it just reminded me of, March through June, we sort of, in the middle of it, kicked off this grocery delivery program, and Cambridge gave us the senior center to operate out of this huge space so we could try to do it safely. And we literally had 50 to 80 volunteers a day. People would, 3 shifts of people packing up all the bags and a whole bunch of shifts of drivers coming and collecting bags. That sense of community was absolutely amazing. Like, this was the sort of scariest time, and people were overjoyed and grateful to be able to get out of their house and do something. And I know a lot of us have all felt that way, just the desire to do something, the desire to do something as a community. And I just don't lose that. I mean, there are so many opportunities to actively volunteer, whether it's remote volunteering. foodforfree.org/volunteer is continuing to take volunteers to pack food. The needs of the nonprofits I know in terms of volunteers have grown significantly throughout the last year, and that's not going away. And then funding, whether it's workplace giving, pick Food for Free or any of these nonprofits or any nonprofit, and a small paycheck donation each time it's enormous. It builds up over time, and it also, it's an example to others. And that's the reason organizations like us exist. It really is because people like you pay us to do it. Organizations like Life Science Cares, we're not doing, we do it because we care, but we do it because somebody else is saying, I can't do that, I have this job, but I'm going to give you a different resource so you can do it, because hunger matters to all of us and housing matters to all of us. So those are the things. And Sarah, I just want to thank you so much for bringing attention to all this. Just even for myself to listen to the rest of you guys it was nice to know I'm not alone in all the struggles that we're facing, but amazed by what everybody's doing.
Yeah, I have to say, and I've said this, and as I've been reflecting over this kind of 1-year anniversary, there isn't one piece of the last year that we would have necessarily asked for, but certainly for us at Life Science Cares, it's proven a model, right? Like, we were working towards this opportunity to find all of you doing really important, impactful work, and to be able to connect you with the companies and the volunteers and the expertise and the network and the space and anything that we could really do to help. And so the silver lining for us is that we know this works. We know our model of partnership and flexibility and willingness to take risks and to try things with you all is something that does add value, and on an individual level is incredibly gratifying in a time when many of us can feel helpless, right? We couldn't control how this was going to play out, and to be able to have a real tangible way to give back online or in a socially distant way, I think has been really incredible for all of us. So just a final pitch, if you are listening, if you're interested in getting involved, visit lifesciencecares.org. We have volunteer opportunities up all the time. Amber is plotting away as we get into the warm weather months, how to creatively get us together and have an impact. You can also make a donation online and set up monthly giving. As Sasha had mentioned, that kind of repeatable support is really important for us to be able to make commitments to our partners as well. And keep in touch. As we know and abide by, if you try one thing, we think you'll be back for the second, third, fourth volunteer opportunity. So now's the time to commit to giving back. And we hope to see everybody very soon. Thank you all for joining us. And we have really enjoyed being partners over this last year. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.